Hello, everyone. This is the weekly strategy call for DXDAO, Friday, August 5th. We're 13 of us on this call today. We're going to be discussing high level, big, broad topics, a budget review, reflections and projections. We'll be reviewing products, revenue, and sustainability, and also looking into the DXD token model. But when we say DXD token model, also our product token models, how they intertwine with DXD, governance, and the overall roadmap for DXDAO. Last time we had John start with the budget review. This time we also have Chris. Would anyone wish to kickstart the conversation regarding budgeting?
Yeah, Chris, if you want to share yours, that's fine. I have like a simplified. It's not really like the full expense report like you have posted, but it was just kind of like the staffing and then some like estimates on additional spend per team. But whatever you guys think is best, I'm happy to share that again if it's useful.
Let me just find that link.
I think they're like mostly the same. I'd kind of done a little bit more on the what are the some of the specifics upcoming to try to like pencil those in from like a line item base. And so I guess like there's a place of looking at this from like just super high level of where is DXDAO spending money, and I think that's not too controversial, or there's not really a question on like where that is. We can kind of look at the past expenses that we've done, or even like looking at things here, which is kind of a representation of where people are being working now and contributing now. And I think discussing how that breakdown is between different products. So I think that's an angle. And then like within the products, looking at like, okay, where there are opportunities, where can we kind of deploy things there. So yeah, I mean, I guess just to like quickly walk through what this was. This kind of is, I guess, 11 days old, so it's a little bit old, with a lot of things that have kind of already changed a little bit, and even some of the expenses that we had done it's now 2 months away. So I'm hoping to do an update on those. But broadly speaking, you can kind of see the breakdown of where the expenses, basically, if you look at like the last 3 months and where expenses have been for contributors for different squads, and then look at kind of the expenses we know are upcoming in terms of maybe there's Swapper budgeting like a $25,000 audit budget, DXGov having like a somewhat one there. And so, I think if you put those together, this is just like what the current state is. You get something like around just under like a 300K burn rate. And so I think that's where we are right now. And then I guess there's like a question of where to go going forward. And I think there's like a discussion about that, about what's the best strategy and like how do we do that. But then I think in terms of like the process, I do think it's important to try to get into the habit of like approving this idea of like, this is what the money will be spent on, because that gives better like reflection and kind of accountability for when the funds are allocated. So I think going forward, when we're making questions about allocation, it's actually very helpful to have like past budgets and looking at whether we do that there. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. I don't know if, John, you wanted to talk more about like where the resources are being allocated, and then like obviously kind of ties into revenue ideas and product ideas, but that's kind of, I guess, where I was thinking.
Yeah, I can share like some of this might just like help kind of add a little more like high level. It's less detail, but it just kind of like gives a refresher on like where the people are basically.
Yeah,
right?
so like screen share.
Yeah, so like this just is like, and like you guys point out if I'm missing something big here, but like Swapper, these are the contributors that we have working on it, plus 3 Space Inch people. What I did here in this spreadsheet is to separate QA and auditing costs into their own tab. So you can just kind of see the teams: Adam Vinke, Dev Violet Milan, George, Velu, Leo, Diogo, Paulo, and then 3 guys from Space Inch doing dev work. And, One thing to note too here is that 4 of the folks here are actually part-time. Fellow Leo Diogo half-time. Paulo's at 25%. And in addition to that, we also have the NIMI proposal, which calls for potential like reduction down to 60% for Adam and Milan, right? So that's just like where things are on Swapper governance. In reality right now, and I think Chris's spreadsheet like reflects this, like Geronimo is not full-time, Augusto is less than full-time, but this is what it would be if everybody was full-time. I think Ross had called for maybe adding somebody in his plan there, but this is kind of like where we are right now. Carrot is really just Federico being dedicated to it. Obviously, there's the general support stuff. On QA, we have Milan, Philip, and then Casper from Space Inch. I just split. So Space Inch doesn't want to reveal what it is paying on like a line item basis publicly because it doesn't want to reveal like its rates and stuff to its employees. And so what I did here is just to simply take like their last one of their proposals and like divide it by the number of people. I think it was like 40K for like 4 people. I may have rounded down a little bit. It's like 10K per person. Obviously,
do these include like one-off expenses for the squads?
No, so like I tried to put like just a quick high level number in there.
I have
but no, like
same information with the one-off expenses.
So if you want to share that,
together,
if it's better, that's why I said if this is useful, I'm happy to share it. If you,
I guess, I was thinking, I wasn't sure if we wanted to go that deep into those, but I mean, I think it's helpful. I'm always willing to dive.
I think like sometimes it's like you get lost in the details. So
just
like this is just like what I did to like help like me really understand it. So like,
cool. Do you see? Oh, it says I'm sharing, but do you see mine?
Sharing? Yes.
So kind of mostly the same like structure here. So this is the different squads, and so I have like governance and DXGov separately. That's how it's been noted in the expenses, so DXGov is like the product team, and governance is like more of the operations here. And so each of these squads, you can see like your breakdown in expenses from monthly contributors to monthly recurring to fixed costs. So fixed costs are mostly like stipends or things that you're going off. And so we can see for each squad here, right? So this is kind of similar to what John was just showing here in terms of like the different contributors potentially to Swapper here. And so I think I used some people's more their proposal names. So Ether Labs is Vinky, of course, and you can kind of see there. And even some of the things like, I mean, Keenan does a lot of work, I think, on Swapper farming. And so just kind of like recognizing that there. And so this is where you kind of get this number here. And I mean, just as I was saying, some like the fixed cost would be for Swapper would be like the event stipends. So I think this is for like 5 people that would be for like that year that's budgeted in. And then like a Swapper audit there. And then this is where the Swapper Space Inch comes in. And I guess actually I'm thinking if the QA is split out, maybe that should be in the other one, in the ecosystem development security. So that's Swapper. And then like DXGov we see here is like a similar format here in terms of the contributors. We kind of, I think the additional DXGov dev that Ross was talking about here, maybe if they can find that, that would be kind of the cost for those here. And then, I mean, thinking about some things that I'm not sure if this is a DXGov cost or other costs, but like Tenderly, I think is a $500 cost. I actually think we might need to re-up that. I did the last one. I'm not sure if someone else is paid for the next 6 months, but I think we expired on that. And then I think this was Ross's estimate of the DXGov audits for like the second kind of half of the year or upcoming. And then, the DXGov event stipends right there. And then for, ecosystem development and security, this is where, I'd kind of put the new QAs, and this is where I'm thinking actually I could put the maybe some of Space Inch's recurring expense. If some of that is actually QA work that's going across squads, it maybe is like better put in this like ecosystem development security one, which is kind of the cross products there. And then, yeah, the event stipends, Infinite Hackathon. I think I'd split that over both. I think this one, ecosystem development security, and then also DX voice. So there's some there. And then governance. This was something, kind of an idea. I thought, maybe we had thought about kind of getting someone that's part-time or someone helping out with some of the operations with Dave and I, maybe somewhere later down the year. And here, I kind of explained it a little bit in the post, but I think for DXDAO, we think everyone should be doing governance. And so actually for all of the contributor costs, I put everybody, their squad 2 would be like 5% devoted for governance, just because I do think that's something that we should be accounting for taking time out of that. And so it is kind of I don't know if it's symbolic or it matters, but I think it's good. It's good at least to know that that's what it's calculating there. And I think it is true for like what actually we do. And actually, I think what I did was I put squad leads with 10% and then like everybody with 5%. And yeah, I mean, we could do 10% and 5% and adjust it different ways. Yeah, and this sheet, like the way that's built in this one, like everything kind of feeds in from these numbers here. So like even when you're on these like these sheets here, you're actually not touching the level or the percent. You're using you're reading in from the other sheet there. And I think that's good because like there's, as I said, like recognizing like, okay, people are working on governance. Like I think Zet, for instance, I always like think it's important that like Zet is included in like DX Voice because he does a lot of work for DX Voice, and DX Voice would have to get those, get that help elsewhere. They have to pay for that, and that's also like time away from Swapper. So I don't think Swapper should be like as penalized for that there. And yeah, I guess just get to DX Voice. This is merch events. Those are actually stipends, and I think the sponsorship actually was more with the Infinite. I might have to look at that again. And yeah, this was just a couple different things. Even the podcast extra, I don't know if that's going to be used, but it's just Keenan been talking about operation decentralization, and maybe there are some additional things there for DX Voice. Yeah, and so that's kind of like it. You can see some of these are smaller, and even for like contributor X, this is mostly like obviously Melanie and Ali, but there are other people that do devote some of their time to that. So it's important to account for that. And then like with contributor X, part of its budget, which Melanie put together, right, that's the DX Bogota Columbia retreat, and then like the Coordinate, which are coordinated by contributor X, and so that's included there. And I think there are like interesting conversations on like where costs go in terms of, I think there was like a Paris dinner. I don't know if that was, I think it was DX Biz, maybe DX Voice. And so those are all there. And so, yeah, I think this like activity of like, this is what the costs are going to be. And then like going back and looking at the expenses of what they are is a healthy one. And so I think this is pretty in the details of like where we are right now. And there's like maybe things to quibble over or recategorize or anything there, but it's more of, I think, like, yeah, where we are now, not necessarily like where things should go.
Is there a way to see the total event spending?
Yeah, I did.
'Cause I think that was one big thing I hadn't really even realized till yesterday, that like the DevCon expense is going to come out to around 200K, give or take, depending on how many people actually go and like what they're.
Yeah, so I pulled that together here mostly from, you can kind of look, there is an events category here for all of those. And so some of these stipends actually like were included, like the Paris ones. And so that's why I think it's like probably close to like 100,000. But this just adds up all the stipends for the different squads. And then this is actually not in this budget, but the Infinite already paid. And then to pay is, and then the DX Retreat is in this, that's in the contributor X. And then I think, the merch should be in DX Voice. Yeah. Down here.
That's just the DevCon ones.
Yeah. I mean, well, except everything except for the stipends. I think there's because some of those are going to be like probably like 20,000 is for Paris.
Oh, okay.
But it's like, yeah, so that's why I think this is probably like, yeah, just 100,000 I would estimate here.
But the stipends could be as high as like 4K plus, right? And if all 30 people went, then it could get something close, but it's probably not going to get that high if it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
So-
was, I think, and I'm just thinking of like, I think like the GX, like I think most of them were estimated by the people that submitted them. I think I did the swapper ones was the only one that was estimated, but I think like DXGov, I think in the one that Ross had in contributor X both had the estimations of what it is. So I think those are probably like, yeah, people that are actually planning to go now. And we could, I mean, I guess like, I don't know, Melanie, is there like a list of, I did buy my ticket. I'm very happy. That was like a big step.
Oh, good. So I want to say that we anticipate, I think at most 25 DXDAO contributors to go. And people have been already putting up their stipend, and it's been around like $4,000 for each person. So I guess like that 100K is a good estimate. I mean, it could be up to, 4,500 per person. So I would say it's
I'm just looking, there's 27 people in the DevCon Bogota chat. I don't know if all of them are going.
Yeah, those have got to be planning to attend.
Yeah.
Oh, we have some spies.
Yeah. I can dive in a little bit more on like what that is. Like, yeah, I'm just thinking 20K for swapper. Are there 5? There's probably 5 people going, maybe more. Yeah. But if that was like,
another big like area of expenses auditing, and like just for like a little more context of it, like we spent 112.5K on Sigma Prime for Carrot V1 and 35K on the same Carrot V1 audit with Omega team, right? So combined, that's almost 140K. And so, that's sort of like the level of spending for, I mean, you have to frame it to the size of the product. Like it's not strictly the number of lines of Solidity code, although that's like a decent rough estimate of like what's going to happen. But it's like the complexity of the code will like influence the quotes that you give. But so like it was 140K to get both, 2 really good auditing teams, one of which is like this name brand, which is why they charge like a multiple of Omega. So that's sort of like an industry standard level of expense on auditing. If we wanted to, ship something like Carrot V1, we could take, in the past we had taken a more kind of like limited, like I don't know if conservative is the right word. Conservative from a budgeting standpoint. We were like working with a single auditor, Phil, and that was it for like some of our earlier stuff that we were doing. So there's like ways, and there's other dimensions to security, like you can limit the amount of funds at first. You have bug bounties. Obviously our processes internally are very important to our like quality of code and security. So there's different dimensions to it, and like just kind of trying to make the point that we can take different approaches to that. We could limit it to, maybe like just an Omega team style audit, or we could even step it up if we felt like it was more serious to make many of the big projects in crypto, get more than 2 audits, right? But yeah, just to provide some context around that.
In the last, I can't remember, someone recently shared a project. I can't remember who it was, and I think their main audit was published, and it was Code Arena, and Code Arena is this like newer type where like you crowd fund the audits, and I think it's a better deal. but that's worth, if there's name brand projects that are using it now and that's their main audit, it may be worth exploring if it's more efficient.
Yeah, I'm definitely willing to explore it. I would be skeptical if you don't know who the actual auditors are doing, who the actual auditors are. If it's like,
Yeah.
it kind of
I like
depends. Yeah.
I like Code Arena because it increases immensely the amount of eyes on the contracts, but it's only valid for protocols and contracts that are already popular and exposed to a lot of people potentially ready to exploit them because for a lot of the capital locked in them. But if you're a less known project that you're not in the public eye, putting yourself in the purview of all those hackers, and some of them, there's the index finance hacker, the guy from Canada. He was actually, prior to the hack, one of the winning hackers reviewing code in Code Arena. So, like, if you expose your contracts to those hackers, there's no guarantee that someone will keep some information secret unless someone else finds the same bug, and then exploit it for themselves later. So
There's a natural incentive where, like, if you were getting paid, 20K, 40K, and you find a bug that could be exploited for a couple million, right? There's an incentive there for people to act maliciously and steal it and exploit it later. So there is this like element of trust, and I think the conventional wisdom on that is like you can sort of mitigate that by one, getting multiple teams to audit, but also knowing your auditors, right? Like if you know, and relying also on their reputation, not just the fact that you know them, but yeah.
And kind of like the security of the contract that you've kind of like engaged with them and employed them and them, later on it would be more difficult for them to do something unless they tip someone off, or I don't know. It's like there's no guarantee in either way, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess to return a little bit to John's question about like the Sigma primes of the world or like the Omegas of the world and how to like balance those, because they do come with different cost really. But I think it kind of depends on what the contracts are and like how much value they're holding. And so I think like obviously I'm thinking of like Gov 2.0 things that are eventually going to like manage like lots of money for DXDAO. That kind of seems definitely something we want to be investing in. And I guess just like looking ahead for the rest of the year, do we think there's going to be any big audit needed that would like justify like the Sigma primes of the world? Or is that something we're looking at like when we have like a more like Gov 2.0 ready and it's like, okay, we're going to use that to start working with like Sigma prime? Because I think we should definitely be managing, like keeping relationship with Omega and like keeping having lots of work for them for like various things that are being working on. And then like for the big ones that we need, looking for the brand name. But I think it's like important that we are selective for when we use the brand name.
Exactly. Like we should be doing that thought process ahead of time, right? Like in our planning, is this product something that is in a position to have success? Like we want to always plan for success. Otherwise, like what are you even doing, right? And I think you do want that name brand audit if you're going to have, tens of millions of dollars of people's money locked up and exposed in a platform that you're launching, right? So I think with like Carrot, we definitely have that ambition, but there's different approaches to it, right? Like we didn't necessarily have to go forward and get the expensive audit. We could have said, well, we'll hold off on the expensive audit until we see enough traction proven for the product, right? And like maybe just do a less expensive one first, and then cap the amount we're doing in the campaign such that if there was some loss, we could actually like probably cover it, and it would even be cheaper than the expensive audit, right? And kind of approach it that's like another way to approach it.
Yeah, and maybe like another added benefit, and maybe I'm not sure how big of a benefit this is, and maybe Augusto and like Federico would answer this, but I imagine there is like a huge learning experience from working with top auditing firm, Sigma Prime or whatever, just because like the report that they have is going to be very thorough. And I don't know, I think there is something about like being able to absorb knowledge for something, especially for something like smart contracts, that I think we also should be looking as just like a skill building thing within DXDAO.
Yeah, definitely. I think Ross, you could probably speak to the quality that you're getting and what that means to the team.
Yeah,
and
I
then we
mean,
will be publishing when they're finalized. Yeah, but
yeah, I mean, I'll be quite interested to see if how their re-audit compares to Omega as well. But yeah, it was super high quality. Like, yeah, the one unfortunate thing, as Dave's pointing out in the chat, is they did use Python to test it. But no, it's
one of
certainly a different level.
one of the unique things about Sigma Prime, they're like, they're one of the, what I would consider the name brand. They also like do their own ETH2 client, Lighthouse, but they have a unique process where they actually will have like kind of like they split their team up into somebody who looks at it as like a black box and writes a test suite for the product, and then somebody who looks at it just from the code side, and then they follow this like process to audit it and come up with their findings. And then they also use that test suite like to address the updates and the changes. And they also like give us the test suite, which is in Python, for better or worse. But like, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting approach. I do think it sounds like to me that like, it has to do with how good they are. Like it's a very thorough, but also probably part of how they are expensive as well. Though I think most of what you're paying for is actually the name brand and not so much directly the people or the process. But yeah. But I mean, lots of good findings, right, Ross? Like, I mean, like we're definitely, I would say we're probably got our money's worth out of these audits. Like in terms
Yeah,
of
absolutely. It's kind of difficult to quantify because like there were similar things that because we've actually had Omega and Sigma they were looking at two different sets of contracts, but there was overlap in the permissions registry, for example. And I don't believe Omega found anything else. Actually, in that example, it's a bit different because Sigma gave us some really good reports back on like what needed fixing or like solutions to it, whereas I'd actually argue like Omega was a bit better because we're like on a call with Yella and we're like talking through solutions, which they're very different, I would say.
That feedback cycle is better, and like it seems Sigma Prime is reluctant to like actually put their like they want to communicate through their biz person, and I don't know. I think we could maybe push to be in direct contact with the auditors. I haven't like demanded that. We could if that was like seen as high value, but yeah. I mean, I think one way people tend to, it's maybe not super explicit, but I think a way that people evaluate and like the quality and also like why it's important to do these audits is how many critical bugs that they find, right? Like, because when they find something that's like, oh, if you didn't know this, you'd have lost all your money. It's kind of demonstrates the value, right? And I'd have to go back. I don't have the ones off the top of my head, but there were a handful of things in the Gov report, right? So. Anyways, I think the point is that they're like a name brand and high cost for a reason. They definitely provide value. We should just be smart and tactful about how we use them.
But we probably don't think over like the next 4. I mean, part of it is also they have to have availability, but probably like not over the next few months. One of the bigger ones, we just had the Carrot and the DXGov ones. But yeah, do you think there'd be anything over?
Yeah, so Carrot V1 looked like it was good, and there is no like I think near-term needs for anything on Carrot. Part of the Carrot V1 design, though, is to like support templates. So I think in theory, if it was successful, like further down the line, something you would want to audit would be additional templates that it also in theory could be coming from like the community. But that would be further out. And I think it would definitely be something we'd want to see some traction with what we've built now before even planning something like that. And okay, then on Swapper, there is a need to update the fee receiver, and there's been some. Do we have the swap? We don't have. Zet's on vacation. I think Venky's also out, right? So they're not going to be able to talk to what they want to do with this. But basically, it's there's some ideas there too about how we could like split the protocol fee with liquidity providers and specific other projects that would require like another kind of like layer on top of the fee receiver, but the fee receiver itself just needs some updates. So those are smaller things, not on the size of like Carrot V1, maybe like half of that or something. And then I think something that we've long kind of known, I think probably everybody here is probably familiar with this, but it would be nice to have an updated farming contracts that don't require like the farmer to have to migrate every 2 weeks or whatever the periods are. Keenan probably is best versed in this pain, and Venky is as well, and the rest of everybody that's been supporting that. But that would be nice to upgrade. I think we're probably all on that page. And then I think the bigger thing for Swapper would be going forward if there is like an upgrade, so to speak, to the core protocol, which is currently Uniswap v2. If we wanted to get current and maybe do something more like what Trident or Curve or Uniswap has done, we'd be deploying new contracts. I think there the big question is how much is just forked and doesn't really require new audits versus like what adaptations are made and stuff. Yeah, there's some other ideas in the running on like what the upgrade would be. But yeah, in theory, that could be a big auditing cost, but it could also be less depending on the approach. On governance, I think the big thing is Gov 2.0 because you're talking about, well, guilds are also big, but we've already spent the money because we want other people to use them and store their treasuries on it, right? Gov 2.0 is probably the big one for us because we want to trust our treasury to that, and we'd also want other people to use it. So there's definitely some governance stuff coming down the road, even though we've done some stuff already. There's, I think, going to be a couple big ones still left before we ship Gov 2.0. So yeah, so that's like existing. Yeah, go ahead, Russ.
I was just going to say more detailed. We've got one in September, but it will be smaller with Omega, which is the main thing that the current budget we just went over and included. And then, yeah, Governance 2.0. After that, I don't think we have any planned audits apart from that.
And guilds, you don't foresee needing another run or?
No, I don't. I think the only case we would want something for guilds is, I guess, like a partnership if we were successful and then like someone wanted something, but even then that would probably be their cost. No, I don't see anything.
But still, like overall, with innovation comes the need for auditing contracts, and it's better to project ahead with a cushion than end up having to dip into the treasury and extend the budget due to some unforeseen expenses, because the priority moving forward should really be innovating and generating revenue. And if that requires audits, it may be an immediate expense, but it will pay off. So it's good to, project assuming that we will have a need for it. Generally,
yeah.
I
was going to say one way to think of that might be to say, okay, we know we want to do Gov 2.0, right? So what's our estimate on that? I'd maybe guess something like 200K, but we can look closer and come up with a more accurate estimate. And then the rest of it would be kind of be like new stuff, right? Like how much do we expect to spend on new stuff? That new stuff could be, additional stuff for Carrot, additional stuff for Swapper, could be a new product entirely, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Even integrating the products into each other as well. If it cannot be done not on a smart contract level, if it requires smart contract interaction, then it would require like further auditing. And generally, the difference between budgeting and creating a roadmap in a bull versus a bear market is in a bull market, you have money, you're comfortable, and you think in terms of roadmap. What do I want to build? And like you're living the large life, and then you budget for it. Okay, I want to do this. It's going to cost this much. This will be the budget this year. In a bear, it's inverse. You think what your budget is, and then you adjust the roadmap based on it. Like you either stay within the current expenditure rate and cap it, or even shrink it. And the way we evaluate, like in an AMM like Swapper, you could take as an efficiency quotient the ratio of volume to liquidity to see which pools are actually generating volume and fees and revenue. In a similar way, we could rate the activities within the DAO based on the value add they have for the DAO and prioritize from there. Because just curbing cost will help, but it's also not the long-term solution if it affects productivity. So the highest improvement would likely come from yield and revenue generation. And because the treasuries in ETH, stables, DXD, product tokens, I think the initiative that Chris is driving with the token model would be productive and helpful, because it will be intertwined and closely related to product development, a roadmap, revenue. It will bleed into the product tokens, the DXT token, and hopefully we could come out of the bear strong. But yeah, it's a lot of things that are connected. We can't say we should focus on this and leave that for later, because they're actually depending on each other in a way.
Yeah, I think it's hard to like really predict something like auditing, because it may be that there's something that just is like blowing up and you're getting a lot of traction, and then you're like, oh wow, this is like a no-brainer. We need to spend the money on this, right? But I think one way to approach it would be to kind of to set a budget for the next year, like 2023, right? And kind of say this is what's approved, and that could be something we could do for auditing. That's something we could do for events, and that would be a forcing function for the teams to decide how to spend that money in the best way, right? And then anything above that would need an additional like justification of like, this is why like it's an exception, right?
And you're talking about new auditing things popping up. And I'm thinking more about like the new chains, or just like, or even like this like Arbitrum upgrade. That is there like another category of audits for, like where maybe we're deploying to a slightly different EVM chain? Or I really think the upgrade one for Arbitrum is like what I'm thinking. Are there going to be other things like that? I guess Gnosis chain isn't going to need anything through the merge.
Yeah, so these chains like that we're on are at least like in theory like EVM compatible, meaning that it should be like an exact kind of mapping of the opcodes from the Ethereum mainnet, and so we shouldn't need audits for them. Now, there's a little bit of nuance to that. I think a big example of a nuance that we saw in effect was the hack on Agave, right? So they forked Aave from mainnet, and then they got hacked. And if you go and you look at like how that actually happened, there were a few things that sort of enabled it. One of the things that enabled it was that the bridge to Gnosis chain actually like was using like creating tokens on Gnosis chain. Well, this was back when it was XDAI, early on that were slightly different than what you had on mainnet. So that was like one of the conditions that, like, if that had not been the case, if it really was just exactly the same conditions as you had on mainnet, the heck wouldn't have happened. So I mean, there's nuance there, and like you probably do want to be incorporating this kind of thinking into your security planning, right? Like we should be thinking about this kind of thing. Like what is different about this, even though it's an EVM chain? Like, do we have to worry about the bridges? Like, how are we worrying about the bridges? Like, in addition to that, we should be worrying about our processes and stuff on the front ends. You could even have hacks that pretty bad hacks on the front ends. Badger hack was a good example of like a bad hack that was not a smart contract problem. It was actually a front end problem. So yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question is yes. There's other things that we need to think about, especially in a multi-chain world. In theory, the EVM ones should be pretty minimal on the smart contract side of things, but we probably want to have people paying attention and keeping a heads up beyond just the smart contracts. On the ZK rollups that are sort of coming around the bend, if we want to compete in that arena, which I think sort of probably makes sense, then it's not clear to me. This was something I was trying to tease out in Amsterdam. I had mentioned this to some people on some calls, but went up to Alex from Matter Labs and I think it was Omar from Starkware, and I asked them directly after their talk, after their panel, like, you know, are we going to need to audit these smart contracts to deploy on it? And like Omar gave me more of a like kind of loaded answer, but my takeaway was basically yes. Like there's going to be some auditing concerns on this stuff if they're not like full ZK EVM. So I mean, it's complicated and it really depends on each chain that you're looking at, but there is these like additional concerns. Say we wanted to go to a whole other chain that isn't even EVM, then and we wanted to like rewrite that could have like a lot of cost, right?
Yeah, I think I got my money out of Agave, but wasn't some of it stuck in like there? Should I go back and get?
Yes, some of it is like vested over 18 months or something.
You should be reimbursed 80% of your losses. And then the other 20%, they made some kind of commitment to eventually return to users, but I forget the exact details.
So looks like there's $9 million in Agave right now.
That's less than before, no?
Slightly less, right? I think it was.
I think it's more. I thought they had like
the deposit APY on X 21%. That's surprising.
On Agave?
Yeah, you can deposit and earn, I guess, 21%.
On which asset is it? The
XDAI.
Yeah, on the XDAI asset. So yeah, does that include the rewards? Because like the deposit, the core deposit thing in this money markets are like fluctuating, right? Like, and that should attract new people to deposit, and then it goes down a little bit. But
yeah, it says base rate, which is not there's some small incentives on top, but XDAI seems much higher than all of the other assets for some reason.
Demand for borrowing, I guess, is maybe but yeah, the theoretic driver.
Also, I think Agave never, like they show a stable borrow rate, right? But I don't think you can actually, I never figured out how you can get the stable rate. I think it's not implemented or something. It's confusing because they show it, but then you can't actually borrow at the stable rate.
I wonder how much. Yeah, Agave was not loading for me for a long time. I think I finally got in. I wonder how much of that 9 million is Sparky.
Probably 8.7.
Yeah.
Oh, this is actually saying that for XDAI, the base rate is 24%, the incentives rate is 3%. Oh, that's the borrow. Sorry. For deposit, base rate is 19%, incentive rate is 2.2. So it just happens that the balance of borrowed versus lent on XDAI is actually pretty tight.
Yeah, and 6.5 million TVL is GNO, which, you know.
And I think what can happen for a market like this, right, is like somebody could be doing the borrowing when the APY, when they're spending like 5% or something, and then somebody who's lending like pulls their collateral and it tightens up the market and drives the rates higher. Or it could just be people coming in and willing to spend this amount of APY in new borrowing for whatever reason. But yeah. Anyways, we digress.
Just looking at, they
yeah.
have a higher TVL than they had before the reentrancy attack. This is on DeFi Lava.
I think you can see in June when Carpet deposited on the chart.
And it's even like in ETH term, and there's
yeah.
So I don't know what Agave token is doing, but yeah.
Aave is not profitable, is it?
It turns out nothing is profitable except for Maker and potentially Uniswap if they chose to take it.
Yeah.
Uniswap now has a proposal to open a Delaware Corp, right?
And that's going to pass because that's like an insider.
Exactly.
It's so funny, like how it can look so well put together. And so when you're like, oh, it's so well put together, it's like, it would not have gotten this far with all of this like information, with all these people like out there, unless it already had some tacit approval.
Yeah, like a friend of mine was like, what's this? Like some people trying to swindle 75 million from the treasury. Then it's like, oh no, wait a minute. Like these are like former Uniswap employees, and this is like 100% sanctioned by Uniswap.
But I think the parent company, what was it called, like Navigator or something? They are regulated by the ACC, so I think they have a pretty good counsel and they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think Uniswap is interesting relative to some other projects that they didn't have a foundation from the beginning.
They actually Uniswap came out of an Ethereum Foundation grant.
Came out of Vitalik's head.
Well, actually, it came out of Alan Liu's head.
Right. Idea first Vitalik and then Alan Liu. Because, but
no, I think Alan Liu suggested, then Vitalik kind of popularized it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
I mean, there is like a claim, like, what did the Ethereum Foundation get a uni airdrop for that $100,000 that they gave to fund Uniswap? I mean, I think most of the like secondary non-L1 projects have done like the Uniswap. If you don't have a token first, you do the labs thing, right? Uniswap Labs, Compound Labs. But like if you have a token, then you need to create a foundation that can somehow like manage it in some other way. I don't know what, funding a bunch of stuff.
Like ENS?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting that the foundation is coming so long after the token. Also interesting that they're choosing a Delaware setup for their foundation and not like a European such and such or some other non-American jurisdiction.
All right. So next on the agenda, we got products, revenue, and sustainability. I think we could have a lot of progress on this when we gather together in Bogota for the retreat and have some good brainstorming with whiteboards and think this through. I believe there was a bit of a breakthrough and a lot happened since the previous retreat in Lisbon. So I'm pretty optimistic that we could come up with some good decisions moving forward for the DAO, for the roadmap, the products. And I believe, Chris, you kind of like envisioned that the token model group would start working and conclude at the same time that we have the retreat. Like it ends on the 3rd month from its establishment of the group, and it ends in Bogota, right?
No, I think it was like halfway or like 2/3 of the way. I can't remember exactly what the schedule was, but I think it was more of that would be a great point to talk about this and drill down some things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do like the idea.
Is this the revenue? I feel like the revenue and sustainable, like revenue is kind of like a separate question. I think we're not, it's obviously related, but like you can kind of like figure out how to maximize revenue regardless of how you're trying to distribute that revenue. And I think that's like kind of an important, that's a related conversation.
Yeah. They're very much related because there's been a big question among us, like, do we really need product tokens when we have DXD? And then we kind of like figured out a model that actually works for us to have DXD and product tokens. And a lot of the conversation would be revolving around that and how product tokens and the revenue that those products generate interacts with DXDAO and the DXD token as well, so that you don't have a conflict between investors or governors, say, in those products and the DXD token holders. So yeah, it's actually a pretty important and tough subject to tackle. That's why I'm in a way in total support of the working group. My concern was if we don't like, we should just make sure we don't drag it out of proportions and like involve external parties and it turns out into a club just chatting about tokenomics and losing the plot. So that was my only concern, and us kind of like wasting our time instead of focusing on other stuff. But if we could kind of like keep it into into the main frame of what it's intended to be doing, it's something actually of high priority for the DAO. Well, let's ask this question. Like Chris suggested that we do it Thursdays. Am I right, Chris? Was it Thursdays? Like how many of us could potentially?
Yeah, sorry, I do have to bounce in like 1 minute here at the top of the hour. So we could, I think we could chat about it more in the forum. I think we still have to like, there's a lot of discussion I think still to be had about what that is. And I think it is a big thing. And so I think we should talk about it go back and forth in the forum. I'm actually working on some related things, not so much the DXD token working group, but more the DXD buyback stuff and more like the short and medium term right now that I'm hoping to get up today. So
makes sense. Sounds great. Good. And we're at the same time at the top of the hour. So I think it was a good one. Thanks everyone for attending. It was a big turnout, 15 of us. Kudos to everyone. Enjoy your Friday. Have a good rest over the weekend and come back refreshed next Monday.
Good work, and thank you, Nathan.
Thanks you, Nathan.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Nathan. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.